Okay, I think we'll make a start. So, hello everyone, and welcome to this first meeting of the spring term of the London branch of PESGB. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Ramsey Affifi from the University of Edinburgh. And Ramsey is going to be speaking tonight on beauty in the darkness, aesthetic education in the ecological crisis.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrian. Can everyone hear me? I don't know if you can't if you can hear me. Just go like that. Okay. I'm assuming that. Yeah. I'll just take that as a statistical generalization of what's likely for those that haven't responded. That's not a wise way to do it, but that's how I'll do it. Okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity. The paper I wrote is, I would say it's exploratory in the sense that I am trying to uncover and give language to types of experiences that I've been having, that I have had in my life, and that I think are important to me, and that I want to be able to understand better, both for my own work as an environmental activist and also for my work as an educator. So the key idea of my paper revolves around thinking about and imagining what role beauty plays in motivating action, and how that beauty could be foregrounded better in education. So, why do I care about this topic? I think it's because when I think about the ways in which people commonly teach about the ecological crisis and attempt to motivate people to change, I see it dominated by approaches which do not resonate with what motivates me as a person, and in some cases are actually quite repellent or opposed to what brings me into this issue. So, for example, I mean, one of the major discussions about ecological issues centers around the idea that we must save ecologies because they're our life support system. And and to me, I find that type of thinking, well, obviously it's true, and obviously it's necessary to protect them for that reason, but I find it insufficient as a reason, because implicitly the assumption is, if you could design a bunch of machines that could do everything that could be our life support system instead, there'd be no inherent reason for keeping ecosystems around. It doesn't attract, it attracts the same motivation on the same level as, like, well, you should fix your roof because it's leaking, right? So there's something uncompelling about that, at least for me, at least the way that at least insofar as ecological issues touch my heart. Then a lot of people attempt to do things like bring in different types of ethical arguments as to why we should care. And those are a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to get into the details necessarily into why I find different ethical positions partial or insufficient. But I'm just providing this as a general context to tell you what I think motivates me and continues to motivate me in not just ecological issues, but in issues in general in my life. And it's the experience of beauty. So I find my experience of beauty, when I consider what it is, as something that appears as a gift in a way. Like like if I'm thrown into this confusing universe that is evolving by a number of processes that are unknown to me for a purpose that's unknown to me, with untold destruction and ruthlessness and mercilessness. The fact that there's beauty in the fact that there's things that can strike me and lead me to become breathless just seems like it appears to me as a gift. I'm not saying it's a gift from someone, but I'm just saying it seems like a gift when backgrounded against the cold enormity of the world. And when I think about my experience of that gift, what do I feel when I feel beauty? It feels to me like something like I escape the confines of my own individualism or my own ego. It's like I get absorbed in something other. The being of something else becomes, I guess the word would be I become I get self-transcended in a way. So these two experiences, I found authors such as Iris Murdoch and Elaine Scarry, who helped me give voice to what those two experiences were. And that's kind of the context in which I'm coming at at the paper that I wrote in this case. So in my experience, when I've experienced something that I find astonishingly beautiful, it's compelled me to action, I find that there's a truth in that which exceeds the types of experiences which are normally talked about when people talk about motivations for action. So this is all contrasted with the fact that the concept of beauty has taken a really tough turn in philosophy in particular and in education. So in philosophy, the analytical philosophers have, on the one hand, argued that it's a concept that's incoherent and have laid suspicion on attempts for people to take it seriously, because that's their approach, is that concepts that can't be handled, that can't be defined explicitly, are suspicious. On the other hand, you get people from critical theory claiming not only that it's ambiguous and confusing as a semantic entity, but that it's actually nefarious, right? So they cast suspicion on beauty because beauty can be used as a way of co-opting or subverting or controlling, right? And we know that this is true. There's a whole beauty industry, right, which funnels people's ability to appreciate beauty into destructive, patriarchal, capitalistic, consumeristic aims, which are antithetical to what I think that beauty's promise is. So there's a problem here in that beauty is something that is dangerous. It can be dangerously corrupted, but it also seems to me that something very important that is ignored. In education, we get the same thing. The word beauty hardly comes up at all in curricula. So I'm just going to ask you to think about experiences you've had for a moment. Think of a melody, potentially a melody that you've heard that drew you to tears, or a sunset that you've experienced, or maybe a conversation you've had with somebody where there was just something so powerful about the experience that it was one of these fleeting moments where you felt like, yes, I don't even know how to phrase it, but let's just say those moments that strike you in a way that you feel like this is how life could be if it's its most meaningful. So I started analyzing what beauty was and how it could get co-opted, and I came to a conclusion that when I started thinking about things like people's faces and buildings and other types of things, and I thought, yeah, there's some buildings which I find beautiful, and the classic idea of what beauty is, everyone from Aristotle to Hutchinson to people in the 21st century talk about this idea of there being a coherence between diversity of parts and the unity of the whole, right? Where the parts are related together into a whole, and you see a part-whole relation, which is coherent and which gives you some sort of an experience of simplicity and of complexity at the same time. And I was like, yeah, I guess that's true. Some of the most beautiful buildings that I have experienced do have that type of unity and diversity to them. They have an intricacy, but all the parts work together. And then I started thinking about some of my experiences. Like, it's happened in some cases that there's been a building that I thought was beautiful, and then I learned about its history. And I learned, once I discovered that that building was built through exploiting people or through colonization or something like that, it suddenly became ugly. What those very same features that I thought were striking at one point suddenly now become gaudy or pretentious, right? And to me, what I noticed happen in that context is that the whole and the part relation just shifted. It's now the whole includes the fact that this building was built by, an exploiter. So now the relationship between the whole and the parts is shifted, and it isn't coherent in the same way anymore. It becomes incoherent because the beauty of that building contrasts with the ugliness of the intent of the builder, and that whole context becomes the whole, right? And it's the same thing. Like if you have these experiences where you think somebody is physically beautiful, but then you get to know them, and something about them, like say you find them evil in some way, and then their face literally transforms and becomes ugly. But the opposite is also true, right? You do also have these situations where you see somebody at first and they may not be physically beautiful, but then when you get to know them, something about their spirit lifts you, and then their face transforms and becomes beautiful. So I started realizing that there is this sort of way in which, say, capitalist economies can cut out an abstract beauty from its context, and by rendering the context invisible, it destroys part of the whole part relationship, which you would see as ugly, and just shows the part and a whole part relationship within that context, which then renders it apparently beautiful. Okay, so I was interested in particular in my experience of things which are vulnerable and beautiful. Okay, so I drew originally from the context of caring for my parents when they were dying from cancer. So when my mother was dying of cancer, I was doing my PhD, and I was, had a lot of time. So I was sitting by her bedside and typing away when she was sleeping and caring for her when she was awake. And I became attuned to the way in which her sickness brought our family together. And it made me aware of my priorities, and it made her aware of her priorities. And I felt that also that in her vulnerability, there was something, I mean, the way in which her sickness reorganized the diversity of our lives into a whole, obviously had a pain and suffering to it, but it also had this type of beauty to it. And it was a type of beauty which guided me to wanting to care for her and to continue caring for her, even though, the cancer was terminal. There was no way that she was going to be cured. But in some way, the incurability of it was irrelevant. In some way, it even made the beauty of it more powerful. And so I got to thinking about the ecological crisis and people who use hope as an attempt to try to get people to impel people towards action. Like, if we can change, then we will be more motivated to change. But it's like, well, what if we can't? Like, what if the ecological crisis is a terminal cancer diagnosis? We don't know if it is or not, but what if it is? Like, and it made me realize it's like, regardless of whether or not it is, we can be seeking the beauty in this moment. In fact, the ecological crisis is the moment of the earth where countless upon countless things are becoming vulnerable beings, are becoming beings on the edge of precarity, dwindling, and in a way, the earth is giving us countless invitations to experience the type of beauty that we can experience if we engage with it. Okay? So, in the same way that, when my mom was dying of the cancer, I could have ignored the pain of that experience and just gone into workaholic mode and whatever, ignored it. I could also just become a workaholic, absorb myself in my job or in whatever daily affairs and ignore the ecological crisis. But another approach would be, I could look at the types of beings that are suffering and devote myself to them, regardless of whether or not they go extinct, regardless of whether or not there's a sixth mass species extinction, regardless of whether or not humans lay absolutely everything to waste and go extinct themselves. So what I realized when I started exploring the concept of devoting yourself to something vulnerable is that when you do that, the relationship between the whole and the parts that I was talking about, right, now becomes you. Your being, your actions are now part of a whole that includes that being and its vulnerability. So remember when I said at the beginning that beauty is something that leads me to feel like I transcend myself, like I escape my own egotism or individuality. I get absorbed in another, right? So when I get absorbed in another being that is vulnerable, the whole becomes the situation that involves me and this being. I'm a part. The unity and the diversity, which defines the aesthetic ecosystem, let's call it, now includes me as somebody that's devoted to this relationship. And one of the gifts that the vulnerable being gives to me is the capacity for me to also feel vulnerable in turn. because its success is not assured. And to the extent in which I devote myself to this being, I become vulnerable in turn. So I've been thinking about these experiences and cases in my life where I devote myself to beings that are precariously existing, or that may die, or that will die, and I find and paying attention to the type of beauty that I experience within myself and how it motivates me to care for the situation that is actually unfolding, right? So instead of me treating a being as a means to an end, right? Like, or some utilitarian calculation, should we bother devoting energy to this being? Like, if it's on its way out, wouldn't it make more economic sense, to spend money saving the oak trees instead of whatever? Because, and then we get into all of these sort of instrumental type calculations, right? But when you're focusing on the being of the beauty of a being and its ongoing situation is intimately dependent on your ongoing interaction with it, it leads to an attention to the actual situation, to the actual being, right? To its evolving needs in a more momentary way. So my suggestion really is that, this is something like falling in love, right? We can fall in love with beings of the earth if we are open to their beauty. And one of their types of beauty is the beauty of their vulnerability, which compels us to care, not just in like a form of patronizing sympathy, but like it's still flush with admiration. It's like if you see a couple drops of ink put into hot water and it just trickles into these complex patterns, it's just this this precarious moment in the universe, and it's vulnerable. It's going to dissolve with entropy. But there's something so special and admirable about these little moments of beautiful, of these fragments of beauty that appear, and you can care for them and want them to flourish and love them for their vulnerability while still wanting to protect them. It's not necessarily a patronizing instinct. I don't believe that that's true. Anyway, so taking a step back to education, the word beauty is like completely removed from education. I'm in biology education, and I think that the biological world is like the most beautiful stuff that humans have access to, and it just is so striking to me that we don't encourage children and youth to fall in love with that beauty. We have a culture that has co-opted beauty, channeled it into superficial and destructive ends, and has not encouraged the way in which beauty can summon us to love the world and to service. And I believe that biology education reimagined could serve that, but so could all other subjects in their own different ways. And that the infatuation with things like capacities, which you see in Scottish education curriculum, where I am currently located, is in a way destructive, because the essence of focusing on cultivating a falling in love with the world is this self-transcendence, this attention to the other, and this capacity to care for and attend to the other in not just, feeling, but in action. But the capacities are all about developing the self, right? So they put the cart before the horse, in my view. I think that the reorientation should be something like this self-transcendence, which, if followed through, develops capacities, and the capacities are the consequence. They're one of the ends. They're not the means. Just like virtues in in ancient Greek philosophy, best pursued are ends, not means. They already get corrupted if your goal is to become a good person in some way, because your focus goes inward and on yourself. And anyway, so I've just introduced, kind of in like a very rough shotgun, scattered gun kind of way, different ideas that I was exploring in this paper. I'm not sure how coherent my narrative has been for you. I was told to speak for about 45 minutes, and we have now reached about 45 minutes. So I can end pretty much now, and we could move to question and answer, unless Adrian has got a different idea on how this could proceed. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. I mean, you've got more time. If there's more you'd like to say, Ramsey, you do have a little bit more time than if there's anything extra you want to sort of bring into it, or are you happy to go to question and answer?
Well, I don't know. I feel like if I've got something else, I can find a way of in mimicking good politicians, I can find a way of slipping it in despite your question. So we can just go on. So we can just proceed with the questions, I guess.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. So, yeah, we're going to have plenty of time now for questions and answers. So please feel free to use the chat, or to indicate if you have a question that you'd like to ask Ramsey, points you want to make, and we can